The murders of the Moore family in June 1912 in the town of Villisca, Iowa, has befuddled investigators for over a century. The Moore residence, open to the public, has become a plethora of strange and unexplained events. Tragedy struck again in 2014 when Robert Larson, a paranormal thrill-seeker, was discovered with an apparent self-inflicted stab wound to his chest. Although not fatal, the mysterious nature of the incident piqued renewed interest in the gruesome murders of 1912, in which the entire Moore family was savagely slain and abandoned in pools of their own blood. The Moore family was an affluent and well-liked pillar of the community, and by all appearances, your typical all-American family. On the night of the horrific incident, the parents, Joe and Sarah Moore, and their 4 children, Herman, Arthur, Paul and Mary Kate, attended their usual evening church service, where friends of the children, sisters May and Lena Stillinger, aged 8 and 12, were invited to spend the night with the Moores. After the service, the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters walked to the Moore residence completely unaware of the horrific events that would unfold in the forthcoming hours. It is believed that the family and the sisters left the church at around 9:30 in the evening and were all asleep before 11 p.m. During the early hours of the following morning, the nightmare, as scripted for a horror movie, unfolded. All 8 victims were brutally and savagely beaten, and all had suffered fatal wounds inflicted by an axe. Due to the evidence collected from the scene, it is believed that the killer was already in the house before the family arrived back home from the service. 2 spent cigarettes were discovered in the attic of the house by investigators the following day. It is believed that the killer entered the house through the back door, made his way upstairs, and waited in the attic for everyone to go to sleep. A neighbor of the family became concerned at around 7 a.m. as she noticed the family had not come out to attend to their morning chores. The neighbor, Mary Peckham, went over to the porch and knocked on the door. When nobody answered, she called out for the family but was again met by silence. She then called Ross Moore, Joe's brother, and he too received no response when he arrived at the front door of the residence. Ross, however, had a spare key and used it to unlock the door and enter the house, while Mary waited anxiously on the porch. As Ross walked around the house, he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary until he proceeded to the guest bedroom, where upon opening the door slowly, was met with the horrific scene of the bodies of the Stillinger sisters covered in blood on the bed. The horrendously gruesome visuals caused Ross to scream out to Mary, who was still standing on the porch, to call Henry Horton, the local peace officer. After Henry, more commonly known as Hank, arrived, he made his way towards the porch and met a visibly shaken Ross and Mary. He entered the front door and conducted a search of the residence, where he couldn't even begin to imagine the brutality of what he was about to discover. He discovered the bodies of Joe and Sarah first. Joe was beaten so mercilessly that he was barely recognizable. He cautiously continued his search and came across the 4 children, all covered in blood, lying in their beds, all appearing to have been beaten and killed by fatal blows from the axe. The murder weapon was left in the guest bedroom, where finally the bodies of the Stillinger sisters were identified. It was concluded that the perpetrator arrived at the residence while the family was at the service and took the Moore's axe upstairs with him, where he waited for his opportunity to commit the heinous acts. A few hours later, the Moores arrived home, completely oblivious to the evil that was lurking above. After everyone was asleep, the perpetrator made his way downstairs with the axe in hand. It is believed that the murders were initiated in the master bedroom, where Joe was savagely attacked first, with the sharp end of the blade. His injuries were so severe and so forceful that both his eyes were missing, and a shoe on the floor next to the bed was filled with blood that had gushed off the side of the mattress. Sarah was next to meet her brutal demise, after she sustained fatal head wounds with the dull end of the blade. The Moore's 4 young children were next, and, in the same way as their mother, were beaten with the dull end of the blade. The Stillinger sisters were the last victims of the sadistic acts. All victims were killed in their sleep, except for Lena, who had signs of defensive wounds on her arms. When the story of the events broke, the town was shocked to its core. The brutality of the incident was so unbelievable that the story even made front-page news, and was the first time that the sinking of the Titanic, which had sunk 1 month earlier, was no longer on the front page. Many suspects were investigated, and pressure was on the authorities to catch the killer. While residents lived in fear for months, authorities believed they had their man, in the form of George Kelly. He was an English-born traveling minister, known as a peculiar figure, and who reportedly suffered a mental breakdown years earlier. Kelly even went as far as confessing to the crimes in court, but the jury did not believe him. Kelly, who was tried twice, ended up being acquitted of the crimes. Another suspect, William Mansfield, a believed serial killer, was supposedly hired to commit the murders by a senator. It is believed that Mansfield was responsible for similar gruesome murders in Kansas just 4 days earlier, and was suspected of a double homicide in Illinois. Each crime had certain similarities, such as the bludgeoning of the victims with an axe, covering of the victims' faces with clothes, and each incident was committed within close proximity to a train. Other suspected murders committed by Mansfield included the unsolved axe murders along the Southern Pacific Railroad between 1911 and 1912, as well as the unsolved Axeman of New Orleans killings. Mansfield was released due to a lack of evidence and him having an alibi for the night of the Moore murders. However, local businessman R.H. Thorpe believed he had seen Mansfield boarding a train the morning after the murders in Clarendon. This would have disproved his alibi. However, the evidence was not used in the case. The Villisca Axe Murders remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries.